And just like that, everything becomes chaos. What is up, everybody, and welcome to my review of Joker Folie Deux. Joker 2 for a lot of us that don't speak French and don't want to fuck that title up consistently throughout an entire review. So the first Joker film came out in 2019 and absolutely demolished even the most optimistic projections and made over $1 billion. For a stretch, it was the highest grossing R-rated film of all time until Deadpool and Wolverine dethroned it, and it eventually won a few Oscars, namely the Best Actor award for Joaquin Phoenix's performance as Arthur Fleck, aka the Joker. Now, I think pretty much everybody who watched this film and everybody who made this film never intended for this story to be continued. It very much functions as a film where it wraps up in a way that you could interpret it a number of different ways, and of course, continuing on the story would kind of ruin that. So it's a film that, like a lot of examples out there of movies that have gotten sequels, never needed a sequel. But when you make $1 billion and you win some Oscars, yeah, them studio execs are gonna come knocking. So eventually they revealed they are in fact doing a Joker sequel. It was going to star Lady Gaga as Harley Quinn, and it was going to be called Folie Deux, which is a French term for a dual psychosis, a psychosis that is shared by two separate people, which was certainly an interesting idea. And then they started to let little tidbits out about it maybe being a musical, and a lot of people, myself included, started to be a little concerned about that. Not the biggest fan of musicals, not that I hate them, not that there aren't some great ones out there, it's just not really my cup of tea. So I pretty much assumed that that was going to be a heavy element of this film. It's probably going to put a cap on how much I can enjoy it, and certainly will not be a film that I enjoy as much as the first one, even if it's really good. And then things got even more confusing as people involved with the film started to then retract and say that it's not actually a musical. I think it was at San Diego Comic-Con not too long ago. Lady Gaga, there was a clip going around where she said, well, you know, this film's not really a musical. We just use song and dance at certain points in the film to convey what's going on narratively. I don't want to argue with an international superstar in the music industry, but isn't that a fucking musical? And so needless to say, I was eternally curious at what the hell this movie was going to be. I walked into it last night not having any expectations whatsoever, other than the fact that hopefully this was at least going to be a movie that's interesting to talk about. I figured at the floor this was going to be a film that I liked, but because of the musical element, is not necessarily a sequel that speaks to me, and I just prefer the first film. That's what I figured the worst case scenario was going to be. And unfortunately, after watching Joker Folie Deux, I am eternally confused, perplexed about what the fuck this thing was, who it was made for, what the point of it is, and all in a way that's not even really all that interesting to talk about. So this is a film that I kind of just want to get my review out and move on from it as quickly as possible. Starting off with the positives for Joker Folie Deux. On a technical front, this movie is very well made. It is really well directed. It is very well shot. There are really good performances. This is one of those movies that you can't just discount as a bad movie or a poorly made movie, because it's not. It's very well made. We'll get into all the reasons why that kind of amounts to nothing by the end of the film, but you have a lot of very talented people at play here making their vision. I don't know what the fuck their vision exactly is, but you have a director in Todd Phillips that started off making sex comedies in the 2000s, ones that I'm still a very big fan of, and how he has progressed as a filmmaker has been very interesting to watch. Like, look at Road Trip, and then look at the things that he's doing in Joker Folie Deux, and you definitely see a progression there. You have a very distinct look that they're going for here, this grungy 80s New York vibe of Gotham. You have all these musical dance numbers here that are very vivid with this Technicolor aspect that very much contrasts from how dark and dreary and grimy all of the more straightforward sections of the film are. I saw this thing in IMAX, and for a film that does not have like any standout action sequences or any like big visual spectacle going on, it looked fucking incredible in IMAX. Even just scenes where you got people walking down Arkham Asylum's hallways and it's just ceiling to floor. it looked immaculate. And even the way that they kind of used lighting in this film to very much be a stand-in for a spotlight in many different ways. Of course, you have the musical and the singing segments where there's a literal spotlight on Joker or Harley, but there's even in some of the more straightforward sequences where you'll have a light start to illuminate as certain things come to light, and it just always kind of has that showman vibe to what Arthur Fleck is bringing as a character. So I thought that was a nice little creative element. The score here is very good, not nearly as standout as the first film, but a lot of that's because they have to incorporate a lot of this popular music, this jukebox musical element into the film, and so there's not as much room for the score for the film to stand out amongst all of this other recognizable popular music, but still very eerie, very creepy at times. It maintains the tone that they're going for with these two films, and when you're moving on to performances, I think there's some standouts here. I don't think that Joaquin Phoenix is anywhere near as standout as he was in the first film. A lot of that's because of how he is directed and what the story allows him to do. He's much more of a subdued version of Arthur, so he doesn't pop off screen nearly as much in my opinion, but he still does very good. He still embodies this character very well, and he's still the reason why you're here to watch this. You have Lee Gill returning in one sequence of the courtroom side of this film to reprise his role as Gary from the first film. I thought on an emotional level, that scene was kind of the standout of the movie, and it really is narratively a point where you start to see what the story is really trying to talk about a bit more as far as like the effect that Arthur has had on these other people, both positive and negative. And I also thought that Brendan Gleeson was a standout here. Now, he's not a major character. He gets maybe a little more screen time than Robert De Niro got in the first film, but I love him as an actor, and here as kind of like one of the main guards in Arkham, I thought his performance was interesting because he's not like this evil, mustache-twirling guard that you would assume in this type of setting. He has a bit of charm and a bit of charisma. He's got like this friendly nature to him. But then the darkness comes out in little spurts here and there where he very much has to maintain that authoritative figure over people like Arthur, that even though he's having a friendly conversation with them, a little smack on the head to remind them who's in charge. I think Brendan delivers that type of character really well. As far as musical performances, I do think that everybody does well here. Now, pretty much all of them are just Joaquin Phoenix and or Lady Gaga doing all of the vocals. So in a more traditional musical, you get all the cast involved and it's pretty much just focused on those two. So it can get a little bit redundant because of that. But vocally, of course, Lady Gaga, it's no secret that she can sing her ass off. But Joaquin Phoenix even does really good. If I'm not mistaken, he actually learned to sing and play guitar whenever he was doing Johnny Cash in Walk the Line, so he's probably continued to develop those skills. As musical performers, they do well. Moving on to the mixed. The main thing you're going to hear about this film, whether people like it or hate it, is it does something different. It goes against the grain. It doesn't go the typical Joker 2 route. It very much rejects what would be the traditional route for this story to take with a traditional Hollywood sequel. And that's true. Is that worth praising? Maybe. You know, does it take some balls to do that? Sure. Is it a risk? Absolutely. Is there some reward involved with taking a risk like that sometimes if it pays off? Yeah, for sure. And it does make this movie a little more interesting to talk about than things like The Marvels or Aquaman 2 or, you know, your more traditional comic book film that is not going to be universally loved and might not perform well at the box office. Jury's going to be out on that, but it's a more interesting version of a film that is not a crowd pleaser. We'll put it that way. It's a movie that certainly takes some paths that would not be recommended by people that are solely motivated for box office return. And that is a little interesting. The other side of that, though, is that if you take a risk to this magnitude, if you make a movie that is so against the grain that quite literally feels like it is intended to alienate its core audience, I don't know if that's necessarily praiseworthy. That seems very foolish. That seems almost against the grain to the point of being pretentious and like borderline trolling your audience. And of course, all movies shouldn't be made with just a profit in mind. There is a certain amount of artistic expression that should take precedence here and there, but I just can't see that with this movie. I don't see this passion from Todd Phillips and everybody involved. Like, this is the movie we really wanted to make. This is something I've always wanted to do, and now is my chance to make it. It just feels like my last movie made $1 billion. Obviously, we had to make another one. I had no fucking clue on how to do that, so this is what you get. Now moving on to the negatives. Tonally, I already started on my negative column in that mixed section, so I guess we'll call that mixed negative. I genuinely just don't understand this movie. It absolutely is perplexing to me. Usually with a movie that is very divisive and bold in nature like this film is, whether I'm on the side that likes it or hates it, I can always understand the other side. I can look at it and say, look, I really like these bold choices, but I totally get why they wouldn't work for you. Or this didn't work for me, but I can absolutely see the type of person this is appealing to. I don't have that with Joker Folie à Deux. I just see a film that has a ton of different ideas that are slapdash together out of desperation to make a sequel to a billion-dollar film. None of them come together for a cohesive vision. None of them are fully explored as individual ideas to even have something for one or two appealing parts of this film to be latched into. It's just something that exists that never in the 2-hour runtime justifies its existence. You always get into trouble when you say a film has no point, it has no purpose, because somebody inevitably is going to say, what movie ever has a purpose? And sure, but there are certainly movies where you feel like there's a story there, there's an artistic vision, there's something that the filmmakers are trying to get out there that does not exist, that they now want to exist because of them. This doesn't have any of that. The first film very clearly had certain things that it was exploring. It was exploring society and its attitude towards the mentally ill and how psychopaths are created from nature or nurture or a lack thereof, how we treat psychopaths in the media. Like, there was a bunch of different things being explored in that film, and it explored them very well and very clearly. You get into this movie and the entire film really just functions as a 2-hour epilogue to that first film. And it doesn't have anything new or interesting to say that wasn't already conveyed much better in that first film. The main star of Joker Folie à Deux is the Joker film from 2019. It just constantly references itself, points towards previous scenes. The courtroom section of this film is riddled with one after another of returning cast members from the first film, reconveying to the audience the events that we already know and then moving on to the next person. It has nothing to say or to add to this character, to this world, and to this now franchise. And the things that it attempts to say, every single one of them, anything that you could accuse as being a commentary in this film, or a theme, or a point, it takes one step towards all these different things, and it never takes a second step. You could argue, hey, they're talking about how the media treats court cases of psychopaths or people that are on murder trials. You could say, hey, this movie's commentating on these sympathetic fangirls like the Manson family or the chicks that wanted to fuck Richard Ramirez. Like, you could say all of these things, and I would say, sure, it felt like they were heading in that direction, but none of it actually ever came to fruition. They just kind of peek through the keyhole and say, here's what we're going to kind of talk about, and then we're going to move on to something else because we have 94 other ideas to get to. So 1 hour of this film is taking place in Arkham Asylum, where you basically just see Arthur Fleck being treated as a joke by these guards, saying, hey, Arthur, you got a joke for us today? Arthur, what about today? A joke for us? Ah, Arthur. He meets Lady Gaga, who is supposed to be Harley Quinn, but they only reference her as Lee for the entire film. So he meets Lee, who, for no explanation and no context given whatsoever, immediately falls in love with him. And eventually she gets out of Arkham Asylum and he goes to his courtroom trial. And the second half of the film is just the courtroom drama, with Lee in attendance in the background. And about every 7 to 8 minutes throughout those two halves of this film, they randomly break out into song and dance. So let's unpack those things a little bit further. First of all, just on a narrative front, I just don't feel like story-wise there's much interesting going on in this film at all. I literally could not wait for it to end because it was just seemingly going nowhere. The Arkham Asylum stuff didn't add anything to the character of Arthur, in my opinion. You get into the courtroom drama stuff, and it's just this extended recap of the first film with nothing really new to say that I could pick up on the events or the themes of the original film. Then you get into the main draw, the main marketing standpoint of this film, which is the relationship between Joker and Harley Quinn, Lee. And that entire thing feels so undercooked and underutilized that it's almost insulting that that was the main marketing standpoint from the trailers and the posters and the press announcements, which is Lady Gaga's debut as Harley Quinn. I mean, they were putting so much emphasis on it. There was people that were already speculating that she was going to be a lock for Best Actress at the Academy Awards because of the nature of what happened with the 2019 film. I'm here to tell you, I don't blame Lady Gaga, but her performance as Harley Quinn is not standout whatsoever. It feels like she was hired because they knew they wanted somebody who could sing and dance. She does great during those spots. There was nothing about her actual performance or the character of Harley Quinn that we're seeing here that stood out at all. Like, it pales in comparison to what Margot Robbie has brought to this character. So if I even hear any whispers about Lady Gaga being a lock for the Academy Awards, that is literally a popularity contest, because absolutely not. And one of the main reasons why it doesn't stand out is because they just don't really feel like they have anything to actually do with her character. She randomly comes into the situation. Immediately they have this attraction to each other. There's no narrative or character development reason for that to happen. It just happens. And then suddenly she's like this stalker person who just shows up at his court dates with different outfits every single day. And of course, he imagines every once in a while about her and him singing on stage and dancing. That's the extent of her character development. That's it. That is it. And so for the movie that they actually crafted, the relationship between Joker and Harley Quinn functions more as a distraction to the story than a piece of the story. And speaking of distractions, look, I may be a little bit biased because I'm not a musical guy, but I have even heard people say this who are musical people. The musical elements of this film feel like a distraction in and of themselves. Traditionally in a musical, the song and dance sequences are there to move the plot forward. They're there to convey what is going on narratively. Essentially, they're singing and dancing through the exposition scenes. It's a piece of the narrative machine. In Joker Folie Deux, they feel like commercial breaks. They feel like every once in a while we take a pause from the story and from the little bit of momentum that we have for him to just kind of look into the sky, go into his head, have an extended dance sequence for anywhere from 2 to 7 minutes, and then he flashes back and then we continue on with our story. Perhaps that's why they were being weird and confusing about wanting to call this not a musical when it was advertised as a musical. By my definition, it's a musical, but are these singing and dance sequences there to convey the plot? No. So if that's your definition of a musical, maybe it's not. It's just a non-musical with a lot of fucking singing and dancing in it. Something that really frustrated me about this film, an element of the original Joker that I thought they executed pretty brilliantly, is them kind of walking this tightrope between reality and psychotic fantasy. There were a number of sequences in that first film where you really didn't know whether you were seeing reality or you were seeing some kind of a fabrication of what is inside of Arthur Fleck's head. And the way that the movie ends, it really kind of puts an exclamation point on that, where you could really reframe the entire film as this psychotic fantasy in his head if you really wanted to. It was very ambiguous and open-ended, and I loved that about it. And that was one of my main concerns about following up this story is, are you going to destroy that ambiguity? You're now going to choose one path and ruin that big question mark that was left at the end of that first film. And they kind of do, but the most frustrating thing about it is they try to continue that element in this, where there's so many different things, namely the musical sequences that are supposed to be these psychotic fantasies, but there's a number of other just straightforward narrative sequences that feel absolutely fantastical because of just the logic of what is happening. And yet, later on in the film, when there's no signs whatsoever that this is not reality, points towards those more fantastical sequences as if they actually happened, it just makes that entire element confusing as fuck. So there are so many things in here that felt like that is clearly something he's imagining. That is clearly something he is fabricating in his head. And by the end of the movie, it treats it like, no, that actually happened, which makes no sense. To give an example, for those that have seen the film, and this is not really a spoiler, so don't worry, there is a sequence where Harley Quinn ends up in his isolated cell in Arkham Asylum, and something happens between them. That at no point felt like that was reality. Like, that is clearly him just imagining something while he's sitting in this cell. And yet, He references what happens in that cell later on with Harley Quinn, and she doesn't correct him. She doesn't say, no, that never happened, or what the fuck are you talking about? So clearly that happened. How that happened, I have no fucking idea. All leading to an ending that admittedly didn't infuriate me on the level that I've seen other people react to it online, but it is an ending that, if nothing else, is just redundant of the message that we already got in the first Joker film, and at its worst, for those that are really going to be angered by it, it's something that basically negates the entire point of existence of these two films. Can't get into specificity, but it's something that they tried to do to be shocking, to be cute, and you're gonna have people that are either infuriated by it because of what it does to the point of the two films, people that are excited about it because they're reading way too much into the fanboy side of it and not just the message they're trying to convey, or people like me where you just go, okay, you tried to be cute and you're literally just repeating yourself. And I don't get it. I don't get what your point is. So all in all, guys, this is just a completely confusing, perplexing film that I just don't think has any purpose to exist. Like, it's the worst version of what I feared this could be, and yet not interesting enough for me to really get passionate and debate with people. I just want to get my thoughts out and move on because I'm just annoyed that I just spent 2 hours with this. It should have never been made. The Joker original film from 2019 should have been a standalone. Everything in my mind that they did here, aside from showcasing the filmmaking talents of the people behind the camera, was for naught. So if you're a massive fan of the first film, know who you are walking into this. If anything regarding what I have said or what you've heard about this film makes you kind of take pause, you might want to hold off a little bit. Some of you might be better off not watching it at all. And for those of you that love it, I'm happy that you enjoyed it. I always try to celebrate the fact that people have different experiences. If you paid your money and spent 2 hours with this movie and walked out very happy, I envy you. I wish I had that experience. But this is one of those films that I cannot wrap my head around. Praising, liking, championing. To me, it's just an utter failure from start to finish. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, please click over here for all of my 2024 new release reviews. I'm also going to put my review of the original Joker up here for you to check out. Like, share, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss everything in the future. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.